I'll Be Your Mirror, Reflect What You Are, in case you don't know, is the beginning of a song by the Velvet Underground, the band managed by Andy Warhol. Warhol's love of the superficial and the way it reflected through reproduction consumerist culture extended to his fascination for reflective surfaces, which literally reproduce the world. Warhol's studio, The Factory, was lined with reflective foil, and his work Silver Clouds represents a move away from painting towards environments. Every silver cloud has a lining made by the engineer Billy Kluver, which means the reflective balloons can be filled with helium. Nearly 2 decades later, American artist Jeff Koons set up his own studio, like Warhol's, using assistants to mass-produce works. Like Warhol, Koons had rejected painting to produce inflatable works and objects framed by display units redolent of the retail industry, exploring the strange excitement that the consumption of pristine new goods produces. This work, Rabbit, from 1986, is a stainless steel sculpture of a Japanese inflatable balloon, and has echoes of Warhol's Silver Clouds in reflecting its environment. But what is reflected by that faceless plaything? Firstly, its price is a reflection of how happily Koons' worldview sits with collectors and the gallery and art market system. When it sold in 2019 for over $90 million, it became the highest-selling artwork by a living artist. By contrast, Hans Heerke, the German conceptual artist, submitted a proposal to the Wallraf Richards Museum in Cologne to display one of Manet's works in the museum's collection, along with texts detailing the social and economic positions of the people who had bought the work over the years. However, since this included the acquisition of the work by the museum, this included the details of the chairman of the museum board and his work as financial advisor for the Nazi regime. The proposal was rejected. Gerhard Richter was born on the 9th of February 1932 in Dresden, and as a child he would have seen art used in the service of Nazism. The family moved to Waltersdorf, 60 miles from Dresden, and 4 days after his 12th birthday, Richter would have heard the Dresden Allied firebombing of February 1945, and would have seen the sky redden through cross-taped windows. 2 decades later, Richter would begin painting cities from the air in a distorted impasto, which the artist confessed reminded him of aerial photos of Dresden after the firestorm. After Eastern Germany came under Soviet influence, Richter was trained to use art in the service of socialism. In 1951, training in the Dresden Art Academy to paint social realist murals, such as this one, about the celebration of a joyful socialist system liberated from fascism. Having seen Jackson Pollock's work in 1959, Richter decided to leave the German Democratic Republic, and in March 1961 took an underground train to West Berlin. In August of that year, the border closed and the Berlin Wall was built. Having lived under fascism and communism, it is unsurprising that in Cold War Western Germany, Richter rejected ideological alignment. "I pursue no objectives," he said, "no system, no tendency. I have no program. I am non-committal, passive. I like the indefinite." And this is something that affects his work, using both figurative and abstract painting, but employing blurring or smudging techniques which cross over between the two genres. The blurring of historical photos is in essence a postmodern effect, rejecting the idea of complete knowability, but also drawing the viewer into the process of scrutinizing history. This painting of Richter's uncle, who was killed soon after going to war, was given to the gallery of Lidice, the Czech town destroyed in reprisals for the assassination of one of the architects of the final solution, Reinhard Heydrich. History may be problematic, but Richter is committed to the process of scrutinizing it. These two paintings are based on photographs of two dead people, Andreas on the right, who died from a bullet in the head. Ulrike on the left was found hanged. Both events taking place in Stammheim maximum security prison in West Germany on the 18th of October 1977. The surnames of these two people respectively were Bader, and Meinhof, key members of the Red Army faction terrorist group. The photographs, and hence the paintings, require viewer participation in the form of tilting the head to the right. And again, Richter's blurring of the images makes us into witnesses, squinting to analyze history. Richter also produced abstract works, but ones which rejected traditional brushwork, preferring instead the manipulation of paint by scraping, such as was used in mass-produced silkscreen paintings. And this technique was also used to disrupt the surfaces of photographs. The effect of the latter is jarring. If we trust the authenticity of the photograph of Florence, then the painting over it is an obstacle. If we embrace the work as art, then the painting takes primacy over the mass-reproducible photograph. Since this work uses Richter's scraping technique, there's an initial moment of seeing this work as abstract, until the Twin Towers and the smoke emerge, and we realize which September is being referred to. Richter is continuing with his usual scrutiny of history and its terrible moments of change, and the usual painting techniques distance us from it and yet involve us. Richter was on a plane to New York at the time, and this involvement made the painting process difficult, having destroyed previous attempts. More recently, Richter finally engaged directly with history's largest mass murder, the Holocaust. When first exhibited, these works were officially known only by their catalogue raisonné number, but have now been named in the catalogue after their source. 4 photographs taken secretly and smuggled out by inmates at Birkenau, the extermination camp connected to Auschwitz. 2 of the images show the disposal of bodies using an incineration pit. The works echo a series from 2005 called Forest, and it's been pointed out that Richter's Birkenau series have the sense of a dark and terrible secret emerging from its hiding in a forest, just as the starkness of the photographs on which the latter works are based show the secrecy which the photographs would destroy. Damien Hirst was born in Bristol in 1965 and was raised in Leeds. While attending art college in Leeds, he did drawings of the human figure in a mortuary, an experience which the artist says deeply affected him. He then studied at Goldsmiths College in London from 1986, and in 1987 attended the New York Art Now exhibition at the Saatchi collection. There, Hirst saw Jeff Koons' Rabbit, which he says he was blown away by. In Hirst's second year at Goldsmiths, Hirst organised the Frieze art show, which launched the careers of several young British artists. And the glass of water on a shelf? At Goldsmiths, Hirst studied under Michael Craig Martin, the conceptual artist responsible for the 1973 work you see now, entitled Oak Tree. The work consisted of a glass of water on a shelf, accompanied by the following text. Question. To begin with, could you describe this work? Answer. Yes, of course. What I've done is change a glass of water into a full-grown oak tree without altering the accidents of the glass of water. Question. The accidents? Answer. Yes. The colour, feel, weight, size. Question. Haven't you simply called this glass of water an oak tree? Answer. Absolutely not. It is not a glass of water anymore. I've changed the actual substance. It would no longer be accurate to call it a glass of water. One could call it anything one wished, but that would not alter the fact that it is an oak tree. Question. Do you consider that changing the glass of water into an oak tree constitutes an artwork? Answer. Yes. Damien Hirst's artworks seem to fall into 2 spheres. On the one hand, his works that show his preoccupation with death and/or decay, cow and calf, or sheep, or this tiger shark preserved in formaldehyde. The life cycle and death of flies, dead butterflies, skulls decorated with diamonds. Into this category fall his works concerning the attempt to postpone death through medicine. On the other hand, Hirst also produced purely graphic works, such as his spot paintings and his spin paintings. The title of the work the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living, is playful in its unnecessary length and specificity, rather like a pastiche of academic titles, when in fact the work itself is incredibly direct and visceral, and like many works of art, can't be fully appreciated unless you're in its presence. It's not a representation of something else, and it's not a glass of water transubstantiated into an oak tree. It's a real shark, open-mouthed, razor-sharp teeth bared. Absorbing this fact is frightening, since the shark was selected for its size, large enough to eat us and bring about our dismemberment and death. And yet this irrational wariness is at odds with the fact that the shark is lifeless, and understanding lifelessness is the challenge of the work. Pharmacy, an installation at the Tate Modern from 1992, similarly deals with our fear of death and our ability to distract ourselves from the fact that medicine will not stop us from dying eventually. Hirst talks about the absolute faith we put in pharmaceuticals, in contrast to the complete lack of faith in art, both without really knowing much about either. One controversy about Hirst's art has been the copyright claim by the designer of the children's educational toy on which Hirst based his oversized, painted bronze sculpture, him, a homophone of the masculine pronoun. Arguably, however, Hirst was using the toy as an objet trouvé, transforming it into something else as a work of art. For me, the more difficult charge to deal with when looking at Hirst stems from one of his own admissions. I can't wait to get into a position to make really bad art and get away with it, he said. If the spin paintings had been done in, say, the 1960s as an attempt to abandon the idea of the artist as craftsperson, as part of the postmodern project of the death of the artist, perhaps art history would look upon them differently. But Hirst got the idea from watching John Noakes do it on Blue Peter in 1975. And for me, the price tag of several £100,000 constitutes, in Hirst's words, getting away with it. It was Michael Craig Martin that helped launch Hirst's career, inviting influential contacts to the Frieze exhibition. Craig Martin defends Hirst against the charge of cynical careerist, saying that nothing could be further from the truth, that the young British artists were vehemently opposed to the marketisation of art. But what they didn't realise, says Craig Martin, was that their defiance would be the very characteristic that would soon attract the market. Hirst wrote a parodically incoherent essay in 2004 about consumers and manufacturers, seemingly summarising his position as, stop buying it and they'll stop selling it. But if we are to take that seriously, surely if Hirst, with a personal fortune valued at £215 million, just stopped making it, people would have more faith in art. Since the 1920s, Colombia had seen violence between conservative owners of industry and land and liberal workers and peasants, respectively. After 1946, the conservative government intensified this violence, with over 14,000 killed. In 1948, Liberal presidential candidate Gaitan looked set for victory and the implementation of his program to reduce inequality. On 9th of April, Gaitan was assassinated and the Conservatives blamed. Rioting followed in the capital Bogotá, which spread to popular uprisings in the countryside and eventually open civil war. 3 guerrilla groups were formed during the war, 2 of which have continued to operate to the present day. Opposed by paramilitary groups funded by the US and the drug trade, with the paramilitaries responsible for massacres and assassinations, and the guerrilla groups engaging in kidnapping and bombings. A 2016 peace accord is working towards achieving a fragile peace. The conflict has had a traumatic and schismatic effect on Colombian society, with an internal refugee population and victims of violence, including family of disappeared or murdered people. Doris Salcedo's artwork has dedicated itself towards expression of this trauma and, through its remembrance, some degree of reconciliation and catharsis. Salcedo often uses objects found in any house, but laden with significance, such as a chair or a table, which the artist recognizes as a metaphor for family togetherness and a place to receive sustenance in the form of food and love, and hence the table becomes a metaphor for the self. Thus the damage inflicted on the table in Unland, The Orphan's Tunic from 1997, and more recently Tabula Rasa from 2018, the latter exploring sexual violence, becomes a symbol for psychological trauma. The damage in Tabula Rasa is less visible, but more profoundly reaching. Salcedo has shredded the table and incompletely glued it back together to represent the complete dissociation of the self from an identification with its former pre-traumatized self. Salcedo also used a labyrinth of coffin-like tables for plegaria muda, or mute prayer, with one of its themes being peasants killed by paramilitaries, then the bodies disguised as guerrillas to claim £1,350 each from the army. In the artwork, grass grows from the soil layer between the two tables, emerging through the upper inverted table, partly a metaphor for growth and redemption, partly about buried things lying forgotten. Similarly, Salcedo has used the empty chair to express ideas of loss. Her work entitled Noviembre 6 y 7, or 6th and 7th of November, partly an installation, partly a performance work from 2002, references through its title and location the storming of the Palace of Justice in the Plaza Bolivar in Bogotá by one of the guerrilla groups, the M19, in November 1985. The palace was under siege by the army for 53 hours, the duration of Salcedo's performance, before the building was stormed using a tank and troops. Nearly 100 people were killed in the siege, and in 2014 the Inter-American Court on Human Rights found that the army was responsible for the disappearance of many survivors of the siege. Over the space of the 53-hour performance, 280 chairs are gradually lowered down the sides of the Palace of Justice.